I'm with Father Bernard McGurkian, an Irish Jesuit, who's currently in Clongowes Wood College. Father Barney, you've been involved in World Priest since the very beginning. You've been an advisor and a counsellor. You've seen it grow over the years, and you've seen the introduction of the Global Rosary Relay. How would you measure the success of World Priest, and do you think it's been effective?
Well, it has been absolutely incredible. From this little mustard seed, Marion got this idea and an inspiration at prayer to do something for the priesthood. And today, about 150 of the shrines of Our Lady are on board. And I mean, if you'd been given 500 million and told do this, you couldn't have done it. It had to be totally something, a work of God. It's a work of the Spirit, helping the priesthood. And at the moment, the priesthood, especially in Western Europe and North America, needs help in order to present itself, because the priesthood is still the same priesthood of Jesus Christ, no matter what people think about it. And it's integral to salvation. It's part of the divine plan.
This year, between I think 12 and 14 million people participated in the Global Rosary Relay, and one of our people, who is a bit of a mathematician, worked it out that represents something like 400 million Hail Marys. And all of that is being prayed for the sanctification of priests. Do you think that helps, and do they look upon that as a support?
They must, because the priesthood depends on prayer. Vocations come out of prayer. It's interesting that the greatest priest, I suppose, of modern times, the Curé of Ars, in that little village in France, Henri Guéon, who was a French intellectual, said this little man, he converted the half of France. If he lived longer, he would have converted the whole of it. It was I suppose, a pious exaggeration. Okay. But the Curé was, it's interesting about the Curé of Ars. Although he was an extraordinary priest himself, there weren't many priestly vocations from Ars, which surprised people. But what you did have was happily married families with big numbers of children. And priests come out of happy families, because the glory of the celibate Catholic priesthood is happily married families. The priesthood is not an end in itself. The priesthood is ordained towards helping others to live out their priesthood. There's a universal priesthood of baptism of all Christians. The ministerial priesthood is secondary to that. It's to help the faithful who are baptized to find their way to God. So it's integral to the whole process, but it's actually secondary.
Okay. The Global Rosary Relay takes place each year on the Feast of the Sacred Heart, so that's why it moves. It's a movable feast, and that's why the date moves. But can you explain to us the connection between the Sacred Heart and priesthood?
Well, the great Dominican Albert the Great said that the Eucharist is the first gift of the heart of Christ. It's actually a gift from the heart of Christ. And for the Curé of Ars, the priesthood was the Sacred Heart, because it is an incarnation of all that Jesus wants for the human race. And it's an extraordinary, humbling experience for sinful men to know that they're called to actually be the Sacred Heart for others. Because a sinful priest, when he actually raises his hand over a person who's sorry for their sins, is acting as God. So that's a very important part of it. And it's the divine mercy. It's the big, I suppose, one form of religion that's so popular all over the world today, and it's about mercy. And the Eucharist is a revelation of this infinite mercy of God. So it's a privilege for all of us to be involved in it in whatever way, because we've all a role in it.
Okay. I'd like to just for a moment talk a little bit about your own vocation. You're actually, you have two other brothers who are priests, one of whom is a bishop. Presumably there was tremendous nurturing of vocations within your family. Would you tell us a little bit about your vocation?
Well, I suppose I feel that we were privileged to have a father and mother who prayed. They just, I'd never remember in my life being in a voyage or a trip in a motor car that lasted more than 20 minutes in which we didn't say the rosary. And my mother told me one time she never could get a row going with her husband, because as soon as one began to come on the horizon, he said, I think we'll say the rosary. And that had ended any further argument. So she said she was just dragooned into it. But the main thing was that they never made decisions. My father rarely gave us verbal advice, but you're just looking at him. He had great suffering in his own life. He had osteomyelitis as a child, so he was lame all his life. I actually saw my father losing his finger on the farm, and I saw him it was a Caterpillar tractor. He was looking after the cattle, and one of the men called him over to ask him to help to pin a machine to the tractor. The gear slipped, and he lost his finger. Just saw him just hold his hand. And it was a big experience. So he never complained. So, anyhow, it was very much just, they never gave advice in that sense, verbal advice. Okay. You just saw what they were doing. And I think I heard the youngest brother, my youngest brother, the one who's been the bishop of Raphoe, he's 17 years younger than I am. I suppose he was born when my mother was 44. He was the last of all of us. But anyhow, it's unusual that because we Irish have been, the Jesuits have been in Ireland since 1542, and this is the first time that any of us have become bishops. Anyhow, and actually, Pope Francis was speaking to him and knew of his knowledge of the Irish language. And the Pope said to him, this is an important criterion here in Ireland, that you speak the local language of the people, and that he has that qualification. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Well, as a Jesuit, I can't let you go without asking you about a very famous Jesuit, Father Willie Doyle. Can you tell us his story?
Father Willie Doyle was killed in battle just 101 years ago this month. He actually taught in the college where I live, Clongowes Wood College. The other Jesuits knew he was a very good, observant religious, but they didn't know of the deep heroism. They didn't know of the extraordinary penance he was doing. They didn't know about it. And then when he arrived in the battlefield, people looked in astonishment at this man who seemed to be utterly fearless, although he was like everybody else. He was afraid, but he overcame the fear. He was absolutely committed to giving the last rites to people, men, and burying them, because, it's very clear that it's burial. We say in the Creed, Jesus crucified, died, and was buried, because you're not officially dead in the Jewish tradition until you're buried. Right. And then he was given the last rites. And part of our tradition, Catholicism, is that the spirit still hovers around a person until rigor mortis sets in, and that's 2 hours later. So he was going out to anoint men people thought they were dead, but he said they were 2 hours. Right. And then also to bring them back to safety. So I think his cause could come again for canonization. He had a deep devotion to the Sacred Heart. What he did on the battlefield was extraordinary. The French have an expression, cela ne s'improvise pas. You can't improvise that. You can't improvise a 4-minute mile. Yeah. You can't improvise a 64 in golf. And if you do that, you have been doing an awful lot of work up to it. Yeah. So he was actually putting himself to extraordinary pain, scourging himself to blood, cold water, sleepless nights, praying. The others didn't know this, but it all came out, and the men that saw him knew there's something extraordinary with this man. In fact, he came to one man who was dying, and the man said, who was actually a Northern Protestant, and he said to Willie Doyle, Father, I don't belong to your flock, you belong to my God. That got back home to, I think, County Down, and the people, it's apparently at one Orange meeting of an Orange Lodge, they proposed a vote of thanks or honour of Willie Doyle. So I'm hoping, in the 20 years after he died in Dublin, we got references to about over 6,000 favours received from Willie Doyle. So I think his time could have come again. But he is the wonderful priest, and he wrote a pamphlet that was a bestseller at the time, Shall I Become a Priest? It was how you discern your vocation. So it's something that should be, people around the world, and there's still people reading that book even 100 years later.
Yeah, and there is a movie about him, I think.
There's a wonderful movie, Bravery Under Fire. I think it's EWTN production, but it's a docudrama, wonderfully produced. It is all some of the shots in it would do justice to Spielberg.
Yeah, excellent. Well, look, Father, it's been wonderful talking to you, and thanks for being with us.
Delighted to be here, Niall.
Thank you.